Thor Heyerdahl would eventually become world famous as the author of the Ra Expedition and Kon-Tiki. But when he was much younger, he made a 100-mile trek on skis across a mountain wilderness in Norway in the winter. On this trek, he discovered a way to boost his own morale. Thor was challenging himself with a difficult task, but his adventure turned into a dangerous ordeal. A storm struck the mountains, blowing into a blizzard. The wind blew so hard, Thor had to lean forward almost horizontally to stay upright. His skis became so covered with ice he could hardly move them. But Thor kept moving forward. He said to himself over and over, "This is the thing to turn a boy into a man." He was doing just what Nick should have been doing in The Game. Thor was reinterpreting what was obviously a miserable experience. He reframed it into a transforming test of manhood. He reframed it into a rite of passage, and because of his reframe, he remained strong and determined. His reframe gave him strength. A good reframe can give you tenacity and determination in the face of your challenges. Wise people, wrote M. Scott Peck, learn not to dread, but actually to welcome problems. Do you know why that's wise? Because you're going to have problems, guaranteed. If you welcome them and embrace the challenge, you will be better at solving them, and you will be less upset or depressed by problems when they come along. Al Siebert, a researcher who spent 40 years studying the psychology of survivors of POW camps, survival situations, shipwrecks, etc., wrote, "One way guaranteed to increase your distressing experiences is to not want to be where you are. Your emotional distress decreases by deciding, like a flower seed, to bloom where you're planted." Some people may naturally welcome problems because those people are lucky freaks of nature. The rest of us can learn to welcome problems by getting in the habit of framing problems as opportunities in disguise. We can learn to welcome problems by deliberately trying to see what's good about the problem, by deciding right up front, this is good, and then working to make it so. I once lost a job because the facility I worked for suddenly closed. At first I was disturbed by my sudden unemployment, but Classy and I decided right then we would make sure we would eventually be glad this happened. At that point, we didn't know what the future held, of course, so we chose a point of view that would help. I took this point of view seriously. I really tried to think about how I could get myself a better job and what that might be. I wasn't just thinking positively. I was determined about it, committed to it. I was going to make sure we were glad this happened. And we were. I remember later realizing we had done what we set out to do. We were glad that old business closed. I found a much better job. Any little trick you can use to help you think of problems as good will help. I remember reading about a business executive who would always respond to bad news with an enthusiastic, "That's good." And then he would seek to find out what was good about it, or to make what had happened turn out for the best. It might sound crazy, but his was a practical response to something that had already happened. He was very successful. No doubt an important part of his success was his response to problems. With an attitude like that, you don't shy away from problems. You don't waste any energy whining about what happened. You don't waste any time trying to find someone to blame, and you keep your eyes open while you're dealing with it. The funny thing is, after doing this several times, saying "that's good" and then making sure you're glad the bad thing happened, you can actually say "that's good" with some confidence. You have confidence in yourself that you really will make sure you're eventually glad it happened. Subtitle: Sales Reframing. Sales trainers often give their salespeople mental tricks to help them see rejections as not so bad or even as a good thing. Do you think you'd have to be a nutcase to think that way? Let's say you're selling something door to door and someone slams a door in your face. How could you possibly see that as a good thing? That's a great question. And if you thought about it, I'm sure you could come up with a few ideas. And although at first those ideas might not make a salesperson feel any better, and the thoughts themselves would seem unnatural and unfamiliar, salespeople who succeed eventually learn to think that way, and it becomes as natural and familiar as the old way of thinking used to, and they no longer feel bad when people say no. They might even feel good. One of the classic reframes of rejection used by salespeople the world over is, "This is a numbers game." If my sales record shows that 1 out of every 10 people say yes, then that means the person who just said no brought me closer to the one who will say yes. Instead of seeing the rejection as a bad thing, a salesperson can actually and legitimately see it as a good thing. That rejection moved them one step closer to victory. It's all in how you look at it. Reframing seems like an illusionist trick or something superficial, but it is tremendously powerful. And people who get things accomplished in this world all learn to do it, consciously or not. Richard Bandler, one of the co-founders of NLP, a school of communication and therapy, says when he was teaching college, he once had a student who complained his house was being bugged. Bandler's reply was, "What a chance to talk to these people." Bandler gave the student other ideas. The student could play Milton Erickson tapes over and over. Erickson was a legendary hypnotherapist. Why not practice deep trance inductions and put the people bugging you into a trance and give them post-hypnotic suggestions? Bandler didn't look for what was wrong with being bugged. He looked for a way to take advantage of it. You can learn to have the same mental habit. Find the advantage and think of the adversity in terms of the advantage. Milton Erickson himself was a master reframer. For example, when he was a therapist, a distressed young couple came to see him. Erickson talked to the wife alone first, and she told him the whole sad story. The man she married had been somewhat of a playboy, but on their wedding night, he couldn't get an erection for her. They had tried for 2 weeks now, and he still wasn't able to do it. She was deeply hurt by this, and she wanted an annulment. But Erickson said, in essence, "But don't you see what a compliment this is to you? He is so overwhelmed by you, he isn't able to do what he was able to do with other women. You are the overwhelming girl. You go into the next room and think about that and send him in." The young man came in and he recounted the whole sad story. He was at the end of his rope. He didn't know what to do or what was wrong with him. The young man said he finally found the woman of his dreams. She was beautiful. He admitted he had been somewhat of a playboy, having sex with many women, but he finally found his one and only, and he was so happy. On their wedding night, however, he couldn't get it up. The young man was very upset by this. Erickson said to him, in essence, "Now you know she is truly the one who has finally overwhelmed you. Don't you see? Nobody else has ever had this effect on you. You have found and married the overwhelming girl." Erickson then sent them home. By the time they got home, they were bursting to get into bed. They successfully had sex, and their problem was over. Why? It was a classic Ericksonian reframe. Instead of an insult, which was one legitimate way to interpret his flaccid state, Erickson gave another and much more positive and equally valid interpretation, which took away her hurt feelings and took away the pressure on him, and then everything could work naturally without being impeded by her hurt feelings or his distressing and therefore non-arousing feelings. Erickson's new interpretation wasn't necessarily more true than the old one, but it had more satisfying results. This couple was on the brink of an annulment. Erickson's simple reframe changed the trajectory of their entire lives. It was quick and almost effortless. That is the power of reframing. Changing your perspective can change your life. Subtitle: What a difference. You can learn to be good at reframing, and it could really change your life in the next week. Not in some distant future. A reframe has an immediate impact. Your trajectory turns on a dime. The biggest thing in your way is that when you experience a setback or a problem, you do not think of your interpretation as your frame. You think of it as reality. So at first you will have to simply assume your point of view is only one of many valid possible interpretations, and then begin to come up with some alternatives. After you've done this a few times, you will realize, if you haven't already, that whatever your point of view, it is not the only legitimate one possible. At that point, your mind is sufficiently open to begin generating reframes. Think of something right now that is interfering with the achievement of an important goal. What's in your way? What is slowing you down? What do you think of as a problem? Now sit down with pen and paper and try to come up with 10 reframes for that problem. If this exercise seems like work, reframe it into a fun game. First, write down your frame for it now. this is a problem, for example, or this is a bad thing. Okay, that's one possible way of looking at it. Now come up with 10 others. Make a list of 10 different ways you could look at it. To help you get out of your automatic, traditional way of viewing it, change your point of view. Think of someone you admire. How might that person look at your situation? How might the lead singer of your favorite band look at it? How might a successful executive look at it? How might an undersea explorer look at it? If you did this exercise every day and nothing else, if you stopped right here in the book and never read anything else about reframing, it would change your life. With daily practice, you would gain a facility with reframing that is extremely rare in this world. The end. This has been an excerpt from the book, How to Change the Way You Look at Things in Plain English, available where books are sold. This is Adam Lee Kahn on The Atom Bomb. This Atom Bomb podcast episode is sponsored by Anchor, a podcast platform, the one I'm using to make this podcast. It's super easy to use and allows you to easily create your own podcast. You can record and edit your audio right onto the app. In fact, you can do everything on your phone. Anchor also makes it easy to monetize your podcast and get wide distribution. Anchor automatically makes your podcast available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. You can download the Anchor app for free or go to anchor.fm to get started.